Did you know nightmares don't always wait for you to sleep? Sometimes they lurk in the corner of your room or right behind your screen. Share and subscribe for more chilling tales that might just haunt your nights. If this story creeps under your skin, show your fear by hitting that like button. We'd love to know. Comment below what time you rewatching this and where in the world you are. It's always fascinating and a little terrifying to see how many dark places these stories reach. Now settle in and keep the lights on. You might thank yourself later. Sometimes the dead don't wait in graveyards. They ride with us, silent, patient, staring from places we're too afraid to look. It's almost funny how normal the night seemed. Cold drizzle, cracked sidewalks, distant horns blaring in a city that never truly sleeps. Mark was just a man heading home, shoulders hunched under a cheap coat, thinking only of leftover pizza and maybe a glass of whiskey to quiet his racing mind. Then he saw the bus. It didn't belong there. No route number, no advertisements on the side, just a long, old thing painted a tired shade of yellow, headlights glaring like twin eyes that had stared too long into the darkness. Its engine made a sound that wasn't quite mechanical, more like a gurgling throat struggling to draw breath. Mark froze halfway across the street. His chest tightened. A voice in his head whispered, "Turn around. Go home." But curiosity is a cruel trickster. It pulled him forward, toward the curb where the bus groaned to a stop. Instead, there was nothing, just a dark space that seemed too deep, like if he climbed aboard, he'd tumble into some endless pit. The doors didn't open. He peered up at the driver's seat, expecting some grumpy old man, maybe smoking a cigarette. He took a step back, eyes so hollow it felt like they could suck him straight into them. And her mouth, or the place her mouth should have been, was a long, lipless gash that curled up at the edges, almost mocking him. Then, movement in the rear window. Mark's eyes snapped there. That's when he saw her. A woman, or what was left of one. Her face was stretched thin over her bones, skin gray and sunken. She didn't blink, didn't breathe, just pressed closer to the glass, misty hands spreading like spider legs against the pane. Mark stumbled backward, his foot catching on the curb. His heart slammed against his ribs. He wanted to run, but his legs felt anchored. Then, slowly, impossibly, the woman's head tilted. A question, a dare, or perhaps an invitation. Suddenly, the bus engine growled again. The headlights flared brighter, bathing him in sickly yellow light. Mark shielded his eyes, but when he looked back, the woman was gone. The rear window stood empty, but inside him, something twisted, like cold fingers curling around his heart. He didn't notice that the city had gone silent. No more car horns, no footsteps, not even the whisper of the wind. Mark took another step back, gasping for breath. Then he heard it, a faint tapping, like nails on glass. Closer now, her neck bent at an impossible angle, head dangling upside down to peer at him with those void-like eyes. That grotesque grin stretched even wider, coming from behind him. He spun around so fast he nearly fell. Nothing, just the street, littered with scraps of paper and puddles reflecting distorted neon signs. But to stay, to let it roll right over him, press him into the cracked asphalt, smear him into memory. He exhaled, the mist of his breath hanging in the cold air. Tap, tap, tap. He realized it wasn't behind him. It was above him. Slowly, with every ounce of courage he could muster, Mark looked up. There, on the roof of the bus, crouched the woman. Mark's scream caught in his throat. He backed away, stumbling into the street. The bus engine roared. The vehicle lurched forward an inch, then another. As if urging him not to run, he shook his head violently. No, no, this isn't real, he whispered. But the tapping grew louder. Now it was everywhere. Around him, inside him, echoing in the hollow parts of his skull. Mark finally turned and bolted down the street. His feet slapped the wet pavement, breath ragged. He didn't dare look back. Mark ran until his lungs burned, darting through narrow alleys where garbage festered and the air seemed to thicken with rot. Every shadow felt alive, stretching long, reaching for him. His own heartbeat thundered in his ears so loudly he thought it might burst. When he finally stopped, bent over with hands on his knees, he realized he had no idea where he was. This wasn't his neighborhood. The buildings loomed taller here, their windows dark like empty sockets, and the streetlights flickered as if struggling to stay awake. He tried to steady his breath. Get it together, Mark. It was just, but even saying it out loud didn't make it sound any less insane. Then he caught movement in the corner of his eye. He spun around. Nothing. That's when he noticed the smell, a sickly sweet rot, like fruit left out too long mixed with something far more foul. Just the ripple of a puddle where a single drop had fallen. He swallowed. His throat was raw, his tongue felt too big for his mouth. A whisper drifted past his ear. So close he flinched and slapped at nothing. Mark. It was his name. Soft, like a lover calling him back to bed. Except it was cold, empty, and dragged out far too long. He turned in a slow circle. Her eyes glittered wetly, and her breath fogged a small circle. Slowly, she drew a heart in the condensation with a jagged finger, then pointed directly at him. Still no one there. But when he faced the street again, the bus was parked right at the end of the block. Headlights off this time, but its hulking shape unmistakable. It seemed to have grown longer, darker, its windows all blackened except one, the rear window. In that window, the woman pressed her face right against the glass. The flickering neon sign was a salvation. He stumbled in, the bell above the door giving a weak jangle. The place was empty, shelves half-stocked, floor sticky. But it was warm and bright, and, most importantly, it was not out there. Mark's knees nearly buckled. He backed into the wall behind him, bricks scraping his palms. His voice cracked. What do you want from me? Like something was following him, drifting close enough for him to taste the decay. He pulled his collar over his nose and pressed on. But the bus didn't move. Neither did she. They simply waited. Mark forced himself to look away and started down the opposite sidewalk. He wouldn't look back. Not again. Yet every few steps, that smell hit him harder. Halfway down the block, he spotted a little convenience store. Cars passing, people walking, rain misting the asphalt. Inside, the lights buzzed harshly. The cashier was a lanky kid with a mop of curly hair, eyes glued to his phone. Didn't even glance up. Mark sucked in shaky breaths and leaned against the cool glass of a fridge. Safe. For the moment. Then he noticed something odd. In the freezer door's reflection behind him, the street outside the shop was gone. No sidewalks. No buildings. Just that bus parked right against the store's entrance, pressing so close he could see its rivets and dents. The woman stood on the sidewalk, her hand outstretched, palm up, inviting. As he did, he glanced under the shelves. His heart stopped. Bare, filthy, skin pulled tight over long bones, toes curling against the sticky tile. They weren't his. They weren't the cashier's. And they weren't moving. He spun around. Through the actual glass doors of the store, the normal street was still there. His heart hammered. He looked back at the freezer reflection. Still just the bus. Still just her. He squeezed his eyes shut, counted to 3, then looked again. The reflection was normal. His pale, sweaty face staring back. Street behind him. Store lights above. He almost laughed. Maybe he was losing it. Maybe it was exhaustion. Stress. Then he felt a tap on his shoulder. He jumped so violently he knocked over a rack of chips. Bags exploded across the floor. The cashier finally looked up, eyebrows raised. Dude, you okay? Mark couldn't speak. He just nodded, breath shallow. Slowly, he crouched to pick up the chips. Underneath, in the tiny gap of darkness, he saw feet. Mark stood up so fast he nearly blacked out. Forget it, he muttered, dropping the chips, backing toward the door. He didn't even say goodbye to the confused cashier. Just burst outside into the cold night air. Mark stumbled out onto the sidewalk, sucking in lungfuls of damp city air as though he'd been drowning. For a moment, the world seemed painfully ordinary again. Cars rumbled by, neon signs blinked, the steady drizzle pattered on his shoulders. But that was the cruelest trick of all, because just a heartbeat later, he realized everything was too still. The cars weren't moving. Pedestrians were frozen mid-stride. Raindrops hung in the air like tiny glass beads. His breath formed trembling clouds in front of his face. Then, in the eerie silence, he heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. Not on glass this time, but echoing directly inside his skull. It was like stepping into a photograph. Its headlights were dark, engine silent, yet somehow more menacing than ever. The door stood open, a yawning black mouth. Mark turned slowly. When he spun around, the bus was right there, parked at the curb as though it had always been waiting. Each step felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, but he couldn't stop. He climbed the steps into the bus, the doors sighing shut behind him. At the top of the steps, the woman waited. Their bodies were shrunken, almost mummified, clothes hanging off them like rags. Some still gripped shopping bags, briefcases, a child's toy, as though they'd simply been scooped out of their lives and dumped here to rot. Closer now. So close he could see the delicate tears in her skin, the way her eyes sank so deep it was like staring into tiny wells filled with nothing. She lifted one hand and crooked a single bony finger at him. The overhead lights flickered dimly, casting long shadows over the seats. Outside the windows, the world didn't blur past in streaks of light like it should. His body felt pinned, muscles locked. His eyes darted around, frantic. Across the aisle, a young woman's head slowly turned to face him. Her skin split at the corners of her mouth as she smiled, revealing rows of tiny, jagged teeth. Instead, it seemed to warp and twist, folding in on itself. His vision started to dim, narrowing to a tunnel. Buildings melted into shadows. The sky tore open into ragged seams of darkness. At first he thought they were empty, until his eyes adjusted. Come. Mark's legs moved without his permission. Her breath was like ice, her grin so wide it seemed to split her head in two. Inside, the air was thick and damp, like the inside of a crypt. Every seat was occupied. People sat slumped in rows, faces pale, eyes wide open but blank, mouths frozen in silent screams. Mark staggered down the aisle, breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Her head tilted, that grotesque grin stretching impossibly wide. She reached out, her hand hovering just above his shoulder, and he felt cold seep through his skin straight to his bones. No, no, no. The woman moved beside him, gliding rather than walking. The bus rattled and creaked, then finally rolled to a gentle stop. His knees buckled. He dropped into one of the empty seats. It swallowed him up, icy tendrils wrapping around his limbs, pulling him deeper, deeper, until there was no light, no thought, no Mark. Then, the bus shuddered. With a low groan, it pulled away from the curb. Mark tried to stand, but found he couldn't move. An unseen force dragged him forward. As he was pulled down the aisle, the passengers watched, their heads swiveling in perfect unison. Then, one by one, all the passengers turned to look at him. Those hollow eyes, those twisted smiles. Mark tried to scream, but his throat clenched shut. The woman's face appeared inches from his. "Did you know?" she whispered, her voice crackling like dead leaves. "You've been riding with us for a long time already?" His mind rebelled. "No, I was walking home. Memories flooded in disjointed flashes. The pizza box on the counter, the whiskey bottle left half empty, the bathtub filled just a little too high. His wrist split open under the water's surface. And then, the bus. Always the bus. Waiting at the curb of every street he wandered. "Hush," she crooned. "It's almost over." He began to sob, tears slipping down his face. The woman's cold hand cupped his cheek. Outside the windows, the last scraps of the city crumbled away, swallowed by an endless dark. The doors wheezed open. Beyond them was nothing but a vast, black void that somehow pulsed, alive and hungry. Mark tried to hold onto the seat, but his hands slipped. At the steps, the woman stood again, one hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "Don't worry," she whispered. "You'll get used to the quiet." Then she pushed. Mark fell into the darkness. Just silence. Weeks later, the same old bus wheezed to a stop on another rainy street. Its doors creaked open, inviting. A teenager stepped off the curb, earbuds in, oblivious. As he climbed aboard, he glanced around for a driver, found none, and shrugged. The bus doors hissed closed behind him. It rumbled forward into the gloom. A tear rolled down his cheek. His mouth opened as if to scream, but no sound came. In the very back seat, a man with disheveled brown hair and hollow eyes stared blankly ahead. Outside, the city bustled on, never noticing how many were quietly, forever, vanishing. Like, comment, and subscribe before you disappear too. If you enjoyed this nightmare, remember, the next bus you board might already have a seat reserved just for you.